In this video, I am going to show you how to do create, read, update and delete in Laravel. Let's start by creating a new project. I am going to name it CRUD. Open the new project in Visual Studio Code. Let's see what our project looks like. In the browser, enter the link seen in the terminal. The next step is to create a database for our application. I am going to use Terminal to create the database. You can use any graphical database management software to do the same. I am going to name the database CRUD. Let's connect our application to the database by modifying our environment file. We need to specify the database name, username and password here. My database name is CRUD and I have a user named root. Now, I am going to add password of user root. We are going to create a recipe app with create, read, update and delete functionalities. For this, let's create recipe model. We are going to append M and C flags so that a migration and controller is generated automatically for our recipe model. The model file is inside app folder and migration file is inside the database folder. We want mass filling to be available with no column restriction, so we set the guarded property to an empty array. First, we are going to design our table. The columns in the table will be specified in the up method of the migration file. Let's create a title column of type string, serving column of type integer, cook time column of type string and description column of type text. Description of recipe will be long. That's why we are using text type for description. Let's run our migrations. Now, let's create routes for CRUD operations. We are going to create resource routes so that we don't have to write all the routes ourselves. Do not forget to import recipe controller here. Let's see all the routes that we have. Let's first modify our welcome page to include links to add and view recipes. Let's clean up this page to include two buttons, one to view all the recipes and another one to create new recipe. Let's create two links to view and add recipes. Let's add some styles to our links. Let's add root to create a new recipe in our Create Recipe link. Let's see all the roots that we have. We are using this root in the Create Recipe link. We can also use the root name recipe.create in the link like this. We can see that when we click the Create Recipe link, it will be handled by the Create method in the Recipe controller. Let's create the Create method in Recipe controller. The Create method will return a view with the form to create the recipe. So, let's first add the view file. Inside Resources folder, inside Views folder, let's create a folder named Recipe and create a file create.blade.php. We will return the Create Blade file from the Create method in the Recipe controller. Let's check. Our link is working correctly. It is returning the Create Blade file. We are going to use Bootstrap for our app. So, let's go to the Bootstrap website and copy the CDN to its CSS files. Let's create a layout file where we include common things for all the pages so that we do not have to repeat them in every page. We will make it inside the recipe folder and name it layout.blade.php. Let's set the title to Recipe CRUD and paste the Bootstrap CSS link that we copied earlier. Let's create a yield section here with name content. Different pages that extend this layout file can populate this section differently. Let's extend the layout in our Create Blade file. Let's also add another yield in the title so that every page that extends this layout can populate this section differently. This will allow all the pages to have different titles. Let's populate the title section. Let's check. Yield title in layout has been replaced by Create Recipe. In the Contents section, let's make a form using Bootstrap to add recipe. Name attribute is very important here. The value of name attribute will be used later in controller to retrieve the user input. Let's check. Let's add other fields too. Let's add placeholder attributes too. They will appear as light text inside the input field. We will not put required here. We will handle this in the server side, that is in our controller. You are free to keep this if this is what you prefer. Finally, add a submit button to the form. Let's check. As we can see, the input of type text allows negative number by default. But our servings will only be positive integers. So, let's fix this by setting min attribute to 1 in the input tag of this field. Let's check. Let's see all the routes that we have. To submit the form, we are going to use this post route with name recipe.store. As seen here, the route recipe.store will be handled by the store method in recipe controller. Let's create the store method next. The request object will contain all the form data. Let's see all the data in request object. We can see that all the form data is received with the name as we specified in the form. Let's validate our input. All the fields are required. If there are validation errors, Laravel will reload the create page with errors. Let's echo the errors array in our page to see if there are any validation errors. We need to show to user that an error has occurred, just below the input field. First, let us check if there is an error with key title. If there is, display a message. Let's check. Let's do the same for other input fields too. We would also like to show a red border around the input field in case of error. For this, we check if there has been an error in title. If there is, add the class as invalid to the input. Let's do the same for other input fields too. Let's check. We don't need this anymore. Oops, all the error messages are same. That's because I copy-pasted the whole block of code. Also, I messed up the serving input field. Let's fix these. Let's check. Validations are working correctly now. Great. Let's put the validated data in an array named data, which we will be used to create new recipe. To create a new recipe in our database, pass the data array to create method. Do not forget to import the recipe model. After creating the new recipe, let's return back to the create page with a session variable recipe_success that contains the message new recipe added. Let's check the session variable recipe_success in the create page. If it exists, let's show a success alert. Let's check. Great, our success message is being shown. This is how you perform create operation in Laravel. If you have any errors or confusions, feel free to comment below. In this section, let's see how we can read all the recipes from our database. First, let us put the root recipes.index in the recipes button. The root recipe.index will be handled by the index method in the recipe controller. So, let's create the index method. The index method will return a view that will display all recipes. Let's create the view first in recipe folder inside the views folder. Let's name it index.blade.php. Let's return this page from index method. Let's check. Let's fetch all the recipes in our database by using all method on recipe model and put it in recipes variable. Let's send the recipes to the index view using compact method. It is very important that the string in the compact method and the variable name must match. If we do so, the data will be available in the view with the same name. Because of compact method, our view will now have the variable recipes with all the data. Let's loop through the recipes and display their title first to see if the data is coming to the view. Great, we have all the data. We will extend our layout view and put all recipes in the title section. In the Contents section, let's loop through all the recipe and create cards for each recipe using Bootstrap. Let's check. Great, we have successfully read all the recipes. Now, we want to view single recipe when we click the title of the recipe in the card. Let's put the title in an anchor tag and put the root recipe.show in the link. As we can see here, the root recipe.show takes recipe as parameter. So, in the recipe title link, let's put the ID of the recipe as second parameter to the root. The root recipe.show is handled by the show method in recipe controller. Let's create the show method that takes a recipe as parameter next. We can receive the past ID here and find the recipe with the ID, but Laravel can handle this automatically. So, we just put recipe object here, which will be the object of corresponding ID. We do not need to do this ourselves. The show method will return a view with the data of a single recipe. Let's create a view show.blade.php in the recipe folder. Let's copy this code and paste it in showBlade file and change the title. Let's return the showBlade file from the show method and use the compact method to pass the recipe. Let's display the recipe data in the content section. Let's check. Great, we are now able to read all the recipes and single recipe from the database. Let's also add a link to take the user to all recipes page. In this section, we will learn how to edit a record in the database. Let's add two links for each card, one to edit recipe and one to delete recipe. We will handle edit in this section and delete in a later section. We will give recipe.edit route to the edit recipe link. As we can see, this route also takes a recipe parameter like in the show route. So, we pass the ID of the recipe as second parameter to the route method. Let's check. The route recipe.edit will be handled by the edit method in the recipe controller. Let's create this method next. The edit method parameter is automatically the recipe of matching ID sent from the welcome blade file. This method will return a view that contains form to update the recipe data. Let's create that view first. I am going to name it edit.blade.php. Now, let's return the edit view in this method. Also, send the data of the recipe which is to be updated to the view using compact method. The edit form is similar to create form. So, let's copy all the code from create blade file and paste it in edit blade file. Let's change the title and heading to update recipe. Also, in heading tag, let's display the title of the recipe that is being updated. Let's change the form submit root to recipe.update. The root recipe.update is a put request, so let's add this line to make our request of type put and not post. But do not remove the method attribute of the form tag. Let's populate the value attribute of inputs with the recipe values so that user can see the old values. Note that the text area content is written between the opening and closing tag and not in the value attribute. We got an error because we did not use the root recipe.update in a correct way. The root recipe.update also takes recipe just like the show root. So let's pass the recipe ID along with the root name in the form tag. Let's check. Great, we can now see the old values and edit the input fields with the new values. Let's quickly change the text in the button to update recipe. The root recipe.update is handled by the update method of the recipe controller. Let's create the update method next. The update method takes two arguments. One is the form data and which is the request object, and another one is the recipe object that needs to be updated. The next step is to validate the form data similar to what we did while storing the data. In this application, the validation logic is same in both cases. So let's copy and paste the validation logic from store method. The data array contains all the validated data. We will update the recipe with this data by using the update method on the recipe. After updating the recipe, let's return to the recipes page with a session variable recipe_success with value, recipe updated. In the index page, let's check for the session variable recipe_success and show the value. We already did this in the create page. So let's just copy and paste the logic. Let's check. Oops, it looks like the cook time was not updated. This is because I made a mistake in show page. There is no mistake in update logic. Great, our update feature is now completed. In this section we are going to learn how to delete a resource in Laravel. We are going to use the root recipe.destroy to delete a recipe. As we can see, it is a delete request. For this we will create a form that submits to the root recipe.destroy. This root also take a recipe, so we are going to pass the ID of the recipe we are going to delete as well. The form also needs method of post as we are going to mask our delete request as a post request. Include the CSRF and also method delete as shown. Create a delete button here which will submit the form. Let's check. Oops, here are two delete button. I forgot to delete the previous button with no link. Let's fix this. Let's also add some space between edit and delete buttons. The root recipe.destroy is handled by the destroy method in recipe controller. Let's create the method next. We use the delete method on recipe and return back to the recipes page with session variable recipe_success having value recipe deleted. Let's check if our delete functionality is working. Great, our delete functionality is working. This is how you perform delete operation in Laravel. Let's also make it so that after creating a new recipe, we return to the recipes page. Perfect. Now as a final touch, let's add a button in our recipes page to create a new recipe. In this video I showed you how you can perform CRUD operation in Laravel. What we have is an application where user can create new recipes, read all recipes, read a particular recipe, edit recipe and delete recipe. Thank you very much for watching the video. You can get the source code for this application in my GitHub. Link is in the description. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to comment below. Finally, please consider subscribing for more Laravel and other computer science topics. See you soon.